Hello. Hello. Hi, everyone. Hi. I hope you enjoyed the coffee break. Now it's time to get back to serious business. And Nika and I would like to invite you to talk about trolls. Now, trolls, by definition, are internet users who are posting on social media accounts and networks, as well as the comment sections of news outlets with the intention of disrupting debates and conversations, manipulating the public opinion, and harassing their opponents. Now, our team has done a lot of research in terms of tracking and identifying pro-Kremlin trolls. And as a result, we have been attacked viciously by them. Having said that, pro-Kremlin trolls are not the only political trolls out there. And many more governments and states are using them to promote their political agendas and geopolitical goals. Now, there are two distinct types of trolls. We have the political trolls whose main goal is to promote political agendas, campaigns, and worldviews. And then we have the trolls who are in it just for the lulz and laughs, who don't really care about the subject matter of the debates that they are interrupting and disrupting and the people who they are harassing. But today, because of the effect the pro-Kremlin trolls have had in silencing journalists and activists, we would like to focus on them as a case study. And now the difference between the political trolls and the trolls who are in it for the laughs is rather significant. But the one underlying feature that they both have is that they are using ad hominem attacks and targeting journalists, activists, and people with opinions personally, as opposed on the basis of their arguments. And they are using threatening and abusive language. Nika will tell us more features that help us identify a troll.
So you see envelopes on your tables, and the checklist we'll briefly run through is exactly the same. So one feature that we outlined there is political narrative. We mentioned pro-Kremlin, but as Donara said, it could be alt-right, it could be anti-Semitic, and so on. Next feature is repetition. And by that, we mean narratives, messages keep repeating. New evidences that support the messages keep repeating in a Twitter feed. In this case, it will be Twitter. Very crucial point, bullying and personal attacks. For those who disagree, for those who are uncomfortable. They are highly active online, so the response rate is very quick, and they are highly active. You almost feel that they don't leave their desktop, or they are always on their phone. Sometimes you also see negative, well, most of the time you see negative language, but sometimes also threatening statements. So keep an eye on that when you'll be analyzing Twitter trolls. Anonymity, not much information about who these people are. And in case of foreign trolls that are operating in different other language space, it's also poor grammar. So the three trolls we want you to take a look at are these. Donara will go into the details of your assignment.
Thank you. Before we start the assignment, the reason why we are doing this is because very often when someone criticizes us online, we jump to conclusion and call them a troll, when in fact they may not be. And then when someone is a troll, we completely overlook them. So not everyone who disagrees with you and criticizes you online is a troll. And that's why we want you what we want you to take away from the session are some of the key features. And we'll discuss with you later. Maybe you have some other features you'd like to contribute that can help us identify trolls. Now, the three accounts we will look at are on the screens. We have Malinka1102, Bowhunter_VA, and EN56789. I will let you in on a secret. 2 out of these 3 accounts have targeted the FR Lab in the past, so brownie points to those teams who managed to figure out which 2 accounts those were. And uh, one thing would recommend you do, you'll have 8 minutes to determine if these accounts are trolls and which features help you identify them as such. So you have to go through the checklist, see if they have any of those features, and don't forget that the most important feature is threatening and abusive language, as well as ad hominem attacks. Now, the way we recommend you do it is go on Twitter and do some live troll spotting. And what we want you to do is, in the search field, type in from colon and the handle of the user that you are tracking. Because you are working in teams of 6 or 4 or fewer, we recommend you split these accounts among yourselves so you can find the answers quicker, and make sure you save 1 minute at the end to discuss it as a team. And then when we come back in 8 minutes, we will discuss this as a group and come up with a list of comprehensive features that can help us identify trolls. So good luck.
Yep. And we start the countdown.
We start now. Oh, shit. Should we mingle and help them? No. Yes.
If I go and help, I'm afraid I will miss the time.
Okay, I will circle around. Hi guys, you finding the task okay? Oh, I'm so sorry. Well, we did assume that people will have. I'm so sorry. We didn't really think this through. Well,
Trolling.
lesson learned
The
for next
negative,
time.
threatening language,
No,
abusive
that's absolutely all right.
behavior.
Thank you. I'm glad you enjoyed it. Sorry you don't have Twitter. But you don't need to have Twitter to be able to look up accounts.
Yeah, we will discuss the results.
think,
I don't
right?
want to give.
Yeah, you can just go on the website and look up these accounts. And the way we recommend doing it is you type in the from
You can
and then
join
the
one of
handle,
the
so you will
tables where
see
there are less
how
than
the
3
user
people.
interacts with other accounts. Hi guys, are you finding the task okay? Yeah? All good? You don't need help? Determine if the 3 accounts are or aren't trolls. If they are, what kind of troll they are, and which features they have. Yes, yes. Hi. Oh, right. Oh, of course, the little envelope. Yes, let me see if we can find some. Well, can I take this? Because you probably won't need. Yeah. So this is the only thing that you need essentially. This is a checklist that outlines all of the features of a troll. And what you need to do is you need to look up, well, ideally all, but you can do just one of these accounts and determine if they are a troll or not, and then what kind of troll they are and which features they might have. The way to do it is to type in from, then on Twitter, in the Twitter search bar, from Cologne, and then the handle of the account. Yeah. Thank you. You guys doing okay? Is everything clear? Yes. Yeah? Wonderful. Hi, are you guys doing okay? Is everything clear? Yeah? Super clear. decided to skip this one. Yeah, sure. Yeah, so what you need to do, whip out your phones and then go on Twitter and check some of these handles to see if they are a troll or not. Yeah.
4 minutes left. Four minutes left.
Maybe we don't need to tell them. Because it seems like they're getting on quite okay. I'll go check that side as well. Hi, is it going all right? Yeah? Are you guys doing well? Yeah? Figured it out? Wonderful. Thank you very much. How is my favorite team doing?
One minute left. One. How they're doing.
Good, good. It seems like they're doing really well. People understood it, like they knew Ian already, so that's good. We don't need any other slides, right? This is it.
You know slides better.
If there's anything else. No. Yeah, I think this is it. I forget to introduce Andrea Bruce from National Geographic. Please introduce her.
And time's up. Thank you very much. Let's start reviewing who are trolls, who are not, and why. Malinka 1102, which troll characteristics did you recognize? Just shout them out loud. Okay, yeah, in this case it was relevant, yeah. Highly active, exactly. Anonymity. Ish. Yeah, we are not sure. The picture is not really, like, you can't identify a particular person from that. What about repetition of key messages? Yeah? Yeah, well, you need to do debunk, but yeah, they keep repeating. What about the most crucial part of being a troll? Negative language, threatening statements? Yeah, negative. Negative directed at something, someone particular, or just in general, like. Yeah, so like ad hominem attacks that Dinara mentioned, they were there, right? Like attacking particular people. Well, poor grammar, probably sometimes you could spot. So in your opinion, could we categorize this Twitter account as troll? Pro-Kremlin. Okay, who thinks that this is just a pro-Kremlin account, not labeling it as a troll? Okay, a few people who are 100% certain that is a troll. Okay, so others are kind of in between. And indeed, you're right, it's not that easy, especially if you kind of scroll down the timeline. Sometimes messages get confusing. So it's always, it's good not to jump to conclusions. But let's move forward to the next account.
Right. So, what troll features have did you think that bowhunter underscore VA had? Can you shout out some of the features? Anonymity. Negative language, yeah. Did you find any threatening or harassing speech in their Twitter mentions? Yes, indeed. Yep. Did you find any pro-Kremlin narratives? Yeah, looks like an American. Then what about? Sorry, take the list. Was it? Is it a highly active account? Yeah. Um, is it anonymous? Yeah. Poor grammar? That mostly applies to pro-Kremlin trolls, so that's not exactly relevant. Repetition? Yes. And would you classify this account as a troll? Raise your hand if you think it is a troll. No one. Okay, only okay. Why? Can someone tell me why you don't think that this account is a troll? What about the negative and threatening language you have identified? Was it targeted at a particular individual or organization, or just in general? Groups of people, right. Can you troll a group of people? Yeah, maybe. Yeah. So the broad takeaway we want you to take from this is that this is an uncharted territory. We don't have a very strong definition of what is a troll and the features that they might have. So very often it goes down to, you doing your research, and as long as you provide evidence to support your statement that it is or is not a troll, do that. Moving on to the next one.
Yep. So Ian, 56789. I think a lot of you have heard about this particular account. So what characteristics can we find about this account? Pro-Kremlin narratives. Repetition as well, yeah. Highly active. Negative language indeed. What about bullying, threatening? Not so much. Like if you scroll down the timeline, maybe someone like went like really far in the like history of that account. Yeah. Is it possible that once a troll account changes communication patterns, we don't see that many features that outlined here appearing. So once a troll, are you always a troll, or can you change? You can change. Does anyone think otherwise? Like, do these accounts still need to be monitored and paid attention to? I mean, like, sorry? Yeah, direct messages, something that we can't openly see. Yeah, that as well. We never know if there's a dog behind the laptop. Yes, so thank you for your contribution to identify if these are trolls or not. And let's move forward.
Yes, I would now like to introduce Andrea Bruce, who is a photojournalist from the National Geographic. Welcome, Andrea.
I have one. Hi. So I was reading that this building is actually supposed to look like a whale. So I think that means we're in the mouth of the whale, which I find very interesting. So for the past 15 years, I've been covering primarily war and revolution and conflict all over the world, mostly for US publications like the New York Times, the Washington Post, and National Geographic magazine. And aside from the actual danger involved in covering those events, representing war visually can be very tricky and also extremely important. I'm going to walk you through some of the lessons I've learned along the way, and also hope that you can see how telling a story visually can help you in your own job, can help bring life to the investigations and the statistics that you guys have come up with through this powerful narrative. So first, I'm going to take you to 2003, just after the initial invasion in Iraq. This is a US Marine who had detained a bunch of Iraqis who were looting banks. And this, of course, was a time when there was chaos everywhere. Everyone was looting everything. The interesting thing about this photo, it ran on the front page of the Washington Post. And it's the first time I ran into the dilemma of, or maybe not a dilemma, but interesting situation where anti-war and pro-war people were using this picture for their own propaganda. So anti-war people were saying that this is the US military overstepping. This is like foreshadowing of military mistreating detainees. And pro-war people were talking about the might of the military and how this shows how powerful the United States is. This is a protest in Sadr City, which is a Shiite neighborhood in Baghdad. These are women, mostly widows, who are protesting the war from both sides. They wanted to voice how they are the ones who are mostly suffering through losing their husbands and their sons and their fathers in this war, and they wanted the US to leave. And this was an embed just outside of Ramadi, Iraq. We were targeted by snipers. This is where photography becomes also kind of a tool because, you know, I can be in some of the most dangerous situations in the world, and sometimes a still photograph doesn't actually show the intensity. And other times it can be an extremely intense situation, and you just can't tell. So this picture, I slowed down my shutter speed. I was actually running with my camera behind my back upside down. And I took this picture, and I like it because it shows the chaos. It's an imperfect photo. It's slightly blurry. There's like dust in it. And that's how it felt. So this is how I decided to kind of convey the intensity of the situation to the audience. And living in Iraq as a journalist, I lived there for 7 years. And it's a gruesome routine. It was suicide bombings, roadside bombs like this one, patrols, hospitals. I usually woke up in the morning to the sound of a bomb. Myself and Omar, who is a driver I worked with for 7 years, we'd run to the car and scan the horizon for smoke. We'd get to the scene, we'd photograph the carnage, we'd go to the hospital, photograph the survivors, go to the morgue, photograph people who had died, and then cover the funerals, all in one day. And this was something that happened almost every other day. And then I would go back to the United States. And I would notice that people really didn't care. No one was paying attention. And I felt like a complete failure. All of the tens of thousands of Iraqis I saw die, the problems that were mounting, all of the questions that were going unanswered, the general public didn't really care. And so I went back and I decided to change up the way I was photographing the war. So I continued to take pictures of the violence and the bombings, but I also decided to take pictures of everyday life in war zones. Mostly because I feel like people won't really care about the damage, about all the problems that exist, even if people dying. They don't actually understand unless they can relate to people first. So they needed that personal touch, that storytelling element to kind of get into people's lives and then understand the bombing pictures and the dying pictures. So I wrote a column for the Washington Post. It published every week. And I told stories like the story of Qasim Ali, this man who was waiting for his Monday morning commute and hoping that most people in Washington, D.C. were looking at this paper also on their Monday morning commute. Except that Qasim Ali is surrounded by trash that doesn't get picked up in war zones, surrounded by blast walls and wild dogs. And this woman, who is in her first reunion with her niece and her parents after a year of being separated, just down a 20-mile road from war. And the fishermen on the Tigris River who became river taxis because the traffic in Baghdad was so harsh from the roadblocks and from the violence that people couldn't get to work. Best friends hanging out in a dust storm. They were told to come home before the streetlights come on, something that my mom in a small town in Indiana used to tell me. A beauty pageant in Baghdad. Exercising in the northern part of Iraq. This is a Kurdish man. Pictures that relate to people. So these are the pictures that ran in between the pictures of violence and the bombings, trying to get people to understand. This is Miriam. She and her family were homeless after her house was bombed during the initial invasion. So she would stay with an extended family member after extended family member until they stayed their welcome. Another way that I tried to get people to pay attention to what was happening is by spending an extended amount of time with one person. So again, I was covering bombings and everything every day, but also for my own personal sanity, I decided to follow one person here for a year. Her name is Hala. She's a prostitute. And prostitution is something, of course, that follows war, especially all over the world throughout history. And I thought it would be good to hear her point of view on what this war is like. So I hung out with her. She became my best friend for a year. This is her from the light of a oil lamp, because there isn't very much electricity, of course. I kind of like this picture because I think she looks doll-like almost. She kept Iraqi dinars in one side of her bra, US dollars in the other. And at the time, Iraq was becoming increasingly controlled by people who were very religious, and prostitutes were being targeted and killed every day. So when she went out during the day, she wore her abaya over her clothes. And this is the reality of her situation. You can tell this is her bedroom where she sleeps with her children. You have a teddy bear up above the bed. This was a picture that Hala and I knew that we needed to have to show the reality of her situation, that it's not sexy, that it's what she does to survive. We thought about having me hide in a closet to take pictures, but we thought maybe that would get me killed, us both killed. And finally, one day, a young man came to the door who was a regular, and I just asked him if I could take pictures. And so I did. And then we all had tea, which was very interesting. And this is, to me, one of the most important pictures I've taken. This is the reason why she does this. You see one of her customers behind her, but these are her boys. And spending time with people, you get to see these unexpected moments, these unscripted things that just occur in real life, the things that you can't predict, to really tell a story of one person and how they are affected by this bigger machine of war. And sometimes I try to do two things at once with a story. This is a portrait series that was published in the Washington Post online as a slideshow. They're called The Daughters of Iraq, and they were searching other women at checkpoints. Most of them were widows. And the local communities, because most widows had a hard time supporting themselves and often led to prostitution or begging on the streets, the communities were trying to hire the widows to do this job, which was actually quite dangerous because women were being used as suicide bombers because in the past they wouldn't be searched by men. But my reason for doing this story was also because I was frustrated of how Muslim women were being represented. I felt like my audience in the United States had a hard time relating to people who were wearing headscarves or abayas. They saw them as these ghost-like figures, almost scary, and they couldn't realize that they were actual human beings. So I thought if I had these pictures running one after the other, people would go through them and see the abayas and the headscarves melt away, and you could see the anger or the sadness, the resignation, the doubt, the determination, just the rage of these individual women, and see them as actual human beings. That was my goal. I rarely know when the pictures I'm taking are actually reaching the audience, though. It's kind of hard to tell as a journalist, as many of you know. One year, though, I was in Afghanistan. I lived there for 3 years, and one winter was colder than the others, and children in the displacement camps around Kabul were dying in high numbers. But the Afghan government was telling the public that the people living in these camps were lying, that children were not dying, mostly because they wanted the displaced, the tens of thousands of displaced people to leave. They didn't want them to stay around Kabul anymore. So one day, we got a call from one of the tribal leaders that said another child had died. And please come and photograph. As a woman, I was allowed to go into this closed space, and there was this young boy, this baby, with his mother and grandmother standing above him. This picture ran on the front page of the New York Times and had an extreme response. The Afghan government, the US military, the US government, individuals from all over the world flew in tons of aid to these camps to try to make sure that their winter was safer. And I was kind of confused because I've actually taken photos of children who have died before and if they've run and, why this picture? And then I realized that this photo was published just after Christmas. And again, another bridge between cultures, which is kind of strange, was this idea of the nativity scene that people in the United States had been looking at, mostly Christians. And here she almost looks like a version of the Virgin Mary and Jesus. And it, I think, hit a chord with people in the United States. It kind of hit them. They understood. So, after covering different ideas of democracy, governments failing and struggling, of people asking me everywhere I go, so this word that the United States uses all the time, this word democracy, what does that mean? And I never had a very good answer for them. I mean, everyone knows it means representation of the people, but going beyond that, Saddam used the word democracy. The United States used the word democracy. Well, what's going on? Hala actually asked me this question. And so I went back to the United States. I did a fellowship at the Nieman Foundation, and I studied democratic theory. This is my tiny apartment in Cambridge. I had these geeky things called democracy dinners, where I would invite professors and community leaders, and we'd talk about, so tell me exactly what democracy means in real life. And there were arguments, there was almost a fist fight. I mean, it was amazing. And I discovered that this is really what I wanted to cover. Soon after this, Trump was elected. And I thought, okay, now I really have to cover this. And so my project right now is to try to bridge two different types of communities within my own country, to try to get people to understand each other, or to try to get people to at least pay attention. You can follow this feed, it's called Our Democracy. I go into small communities across the United States, and I start by showing them some of my own work in different countries, in different places where their governments are thriving or failing. And I get them to answer the question what democracy looks like to them. And they take these pictures through Instagram, through their iPhones or their smartphones, and then I publish them. And it's surprising because everyone thinks that it means something different. This is a rebel flag in North Carolina. And this is a rugby team in Memphis. And so I'm doing this kind of different type of exploration. Once I talk to the communities themselves and get them involved, and they're actually quite excited about getting involved, I then take my own pictures of what the community is going through and if democracy still exists in those communities on a day-to-day basis, kind of far from the national news, just practical, everyday life. So with a little help from National Geographic and the Catchlight Foundation, I'm going on a different type of exploration in the United States. This word, normally represented by theory, democracy, I need to try to figure out what it means to people in the United States so that I can continue covering it overseas. Another attempt to get people to simply pay attention to what's happening around them is the goal of photography for me and the goal of this project. And that's it. So I can take any questions too. Any questions? Yes.
I just want to know, how far can one go in thinking about the target audience and how to reach them when taking photographs so that it doesn't become misrepresentation, but you stay within the boundaries of journalism and kind of staying true to the real situation so it doesn't get too much into marketing territory?
Right, of course. So I think that, I'm a journalist first and foremost. I have other people asking me questions constantly, editors. I think keeping your objectivity is extremely important. So, and I don't think you can do that alone as one person. I think that finding advice from others, getting other eyes on your work is important. But it is hard. I think about the audience strictly in the sense of trying to get them to pay attention, but not trying to sell them a certain point of view necessarily. I'm just showing them what I see, and then hoping that as long as you're taking pictures from several different points of view. I was embedded with the military sometimes, openly like telling people that's what's happening. And I think that's actually one of the trickier instances is when you're being provided everything to live by an organization like the military. To make sure that you stay objective in those situations is even more important. But yeah, just to get people to pay attention is not something I'm trying to sell them. It's just something I'm trying to like increase awareness in that way, because people seem very apathetic, even to the amazing work that you guys are doing. I mean, you spend your whole life, doing research on like how many people are dying in one area and the extreme detail that we're going through, and then people don't pay attention. It's a bit hard.
Question over here.
Yeah.
What has been your biggest takeaway from your latest project?
My biggest takeaway is that people don't have the same idea of what democracy means. And that's kind of scary to me, because if people don't have the same idea of what it means, then how will they know to fight for it if it starts to disappear? And yeah, so that's probably so far. I mean, I have several years to go. I'm just beginning, but that so far is my biggest takeaway. Yes?
I'm wondering, because like metaphor is like essentially a poetic device and it's important that it's false, right? Like my heart is on fire. It's an important thing about my heart that it's not on fire, right? When you take a photo of a room and a rock, for example, it's nothing bigger than the room, right? It is just the person in the room, but you need to like make it emblematic of the conflict more broadly, or the people's experience more broadly. So I'm wondering like how you select for that. How do you choose which things represent something bigger than, right, just the person in the photo? What do you look for?
Well, I don't necessarily think that I'm looking constantly for that. I think I'm just putting myself out there in as many situations as possible. I sometimes live with people. I like to immerse myself in their lives, and then things happen, and then you sit back and you say, oh, okay, so this is something that someone can relate to in the United States, and this is actually, a picture of something that's happening all over the world, or something people should pay attention to because it represents the statistics that people have been studying or researching for years, or something like that. So I think it's just almost by accident that I run into those situations, which is what I prefer, because then you get into the problem of objectivity. I'm not purposely going out to look for something that's, it's just what you run into when you're out there. If that makes sense, right? Anyone else? No.
Okay.
Oh,
so maybe we
these.
can go to one of these. Yeah.
What's the most effort you ever went through to take a photo? Wow, that's a hard question. I don't really know. I mean, there are lots of different types of effort that you can you can talk about there's the danger issue or just spending time. I think that's the biggest effort that we have is the time that we take to get to one photo that is the photo that tells the story of the war or that person's life in that situation. And usually I spend months with people to get to a real intimate and telling place that's not cliche, that's not, I don't know, something that reaches people on a different level than just what can pop into your head when you imagine a situation. I try not to take that picture. I try to take something that you haven't seen before, which is hard. Have the responses you've gotten varied across different cultures? The responses I've gotten to the question of what democracy means, or maybe, or the responses I get as a person. Does anyone? Anyway, as a person, the response I get as a photographer, of course, I'm a woman, so there's that. That definitely varies across cultures. In the Middle East or in Afghanistan, I'm sort of like, I'm a foreign woman, so I'm almost like an honorary man. And I can be in a man's world, but I can also be in a woman's world, which is a huge honor. In different cultures, when people ask me what democracy means, I ask them also what they think democracy means, and that's also fascinating. Like people in Iraq thought democracy meant wealth. They're like, yay, the Americans are here. We're gonna be rich. And they were sorely disappointed. So yes, both. It definitely is different in different cultures.
And we have a question from the audience.
Hi, Andrea. You mentioned that you were able to take that picture that had so much impact because you were a woman and you were allowed to enter that space. Can you think of instances in other cultures, like in your current project, where your gender actually gives you more access?
Across the United States? I don't know. I think actually my gender becomes maybe a little bit more of an issue, like a problem in the United States in different arenas. You know, I think the kind of bro-y guy world, taking pictures of that is a little tougher when you're a woman. Especially, I don't know, it can become a little stickier, I think, in the United States than I found it was in the Middle East or Afghanistan. So I think it's actually can be a little more difficult.
Hi, so I've worked with a lot of war photographers and documentarians, and they've come in and spoken with some of our students at Berkeley. And a few of them who are really advanced in their careers have suggested that now is not a good time to go out and do that they're finding there's a lot of harms to some of the fixers who are left behind, the psychological aspects of it and the physical dangers that seem to be increasing. How do you deal with the physical challenges, but then you're obviously also very immersed in the imagery and also the context. How do you deal with the psychosocial component of your work?
You mean personally?
Yeah,
Okay.
I think that's the biggest thing we've been struggling with is how to deal with the context and the imagery that they're facing.
Yeah, I mean, I do agree that right now is a hard time. The wars shift and change, and it's a different danger for most people now than it was 5 years ago even. So it is more difficult to be on the front lines. And I think, you know, when I started covering war, I was 29 or so. So you don't really feel the effects, I think, until you've been doing this for a long time. I think the most important thing for us photographers is to make sure is to try to make sure that everyone working with you and everyone you're covering is safe and that you're not putting them in added danger, which is something that is always in the forefront of our minds. And when that fails, then it becomes a little bit more intense for you as a person. And you can feel, you know, the weight of what every step you take weighs much more than it did before. I think also losing a lot of coworkers along the way has a huge toll. So, you know, we're kind of a small group of reporters and photographers who cover war, and when people start dying, this net of support starts to fall apart, and that can be tough too. So, yeah, it's definitely not an easy thing.
So maybe on a positive note, is there something that you found kind of restores your passion for your work and takes care of you while you're doing this?
Well, of course. I mean, it sounds kind of trite, though, almost, but it's definitely true. The people that you run into, the friends that you make along the way, the Iraqis who, you know, get bombed every day and the next day are like picking up the pieces and putting their business back together and opening the doors. It does restore your like faith in human beings in some way. So I do get a lot of inspiration from them. So. Was there a particular photo not published that left you disappointed? You know, for the first couple years that I covered the war in Iraq, we didn't have a lot of internet. We had like weird satellite phones that that didn't always work very well, so I didn't even see what was getting published very often. I was just like sending photos into this void, and I didn't always know. And then, you know, I came back to Washington, D.C., and I realized that a lot of the photos that I took weren't getting published. And I do think that news organizations fell into the trap of like, they don't want to seem unpatriotic by running too much of like, these soldiers are being injured or war can be bloody. So I was disappointed. I thought there was a lot that was missed in the very beginning. But then I think the news organizations pulled it together and realized what they had done, including the Washington Post. So, any other questions? No? Okay. Thank you very much.
All right, so that was our last session of the day. It was extremely powerful. One of the things that is the biggest takeaway for me is pulling away from our keyboards while we're doing research, and that's especially relevant and immediate to the DFR lab team. So when we write something, it could be the most objective or dispassionate or thorough piece of research or thorough data set, and we could be, you know, hiving on our Slack channels, which are always going. It makes our time zones really weird. But it could be the most thorough piece of research. And what Andrea's work tells us is that if you're not telling a story, or if you're not connecting your work back to something that is tangible in the real world, then it's kind of like a tree falling in the middle of a forest and not making a sound, right? If there's nobody around to hear it, then did it make a sound? Same goes with your research. So what is the story that you're trying to tell? And then a few of the other takeaways for today. Clearly, first and foremost, open source research. Anybody can do it. That's what the table games are for, right? Anybody can do it. Anybody that has access to the internet, which we made sure of first and foremost this morning, you can do it. The second thing is that it's not 100%. There's no kind of silver bullet approach that will prove or disprove things every single time. And that's why we teach methods. That's why we teach different platforms and things like that. It's a set of strategies in order to apply to your work. And sometimes some will work and sometimes some won't. And then the other piece, and I think that Nick Waters and Bana were particularly good at kind of conveying this, is that this work is anchored in the real world. Every time we're proving or disproving something or trying to explain something, it's because something is actually happening somewhere else. So those are the 3 points for me. A little bit of housekeeping. Tomorrow, we'll start sharp at 9 a.m. We'll have coffee, I promise you that. We're going to start with a conversation with Madeline Albright. If you haven't registered for Freedom Awards tomorrow evening, and you want to, grab anybody that has an Atlantic Council badge. Grab any of the staff around. If you know you're registered, great. If you don't know you're registered, grab somebody. If you don't care, that's fine. And then the last thing is, we're going to end with a short activity from Lucas that will lead into tonight's activity. So Lucas, come on up. Huh?
Thank you. All right. As we're almost done with first day of 360 OS, the DFR Lab team has one more challenge for you. We would like you to invite all of you to meet the team, have a drink, have a chat. But the problem is that we're not going to exactly tell you the location. You'll have to find it yourselves. And the first person who's going to find it and who's going to tell us how he found it is going to get a very special prize. He's going, or she or he will go, is going to get Bana's book, signed by Bana. And everyone else who's going to show up are going to get signature DFR Lab t-shirt. So I'm going to show you two photos. One photo is taken from inside of the place. The other photo is taken close to the place. And who's going to tell me the address and the place? Well, just when you know it, raise your hand and let the game begin. Also, you can download these photos from Twitter, from our app, and you also can find them on Twitter. Do we have a winner? Would you like to tell us how you found it?
I went to the library.
Yeah?
Stayed near this house.
Yeah?
Sorry, I didn't want to break
No worries. And what is the place?
Microsoft Cafe. It's really nice.
Yeah, wonderful. Wonderful. We have a winner. We'll present you the book tomorrow. And in the meanwhile, we actually ran these photos with our team. And let me show you how a person who doesn't know or who hasn't been to the place, how can he find it looking at these photos? So the first giveaway on these photos are the flags. There's a Hungarian flag. And what do you think Hungarian flag stands for in Berlin? It's an embassy or consulate, of course. There's another flag, there's a German flag, and then we have a row of roofs. So if we would just Google Hungarian embassy, if we would just type it into Google Maps, we could get a view like this. And then we can turn right, and then we can see the red roofs, right? So we already know approximately the location. It's still hard to get exact place, so we need to take a deeper look at the next photo. And then what do you guys see in this photo that might be of value? Souvenir shop, yes. What else? Construction, yes. What else? Very good. Has any one of you noticed this website? So if you would Google it, it actually takes you to the subway station. And if you look at the stations, there are only 3 stations that are actually being under construction right now. So already, if you look through all three of them, you would find this basically 3 big crossings. And now all you have to do is go through every single one and match up this house with it. And it's in front of it. As easy as that. So here's the actual address. And we're going to start the happy hour at 7 o'clock. And I hope to see you all there and have a drink with you. Yes, don't forget to bring your badge because you're not going to get allowed without a badge. Thank you. See you there.
Nailed it. Nice. Well done. You guys did well presenting. I wasn't here enough to know anything about what was going on.
I know where you can get a video of that.
Huh?
I know where you can get the video of the whole thing.
Yeah, exactly.